Welcome to this program on taxonomy of educational objectives and the implications for digital learning. This is a MOOC course and this is available free to all of you. What we will do in this program is that we will try to appreciate and understand that how the different domains of learning within mental structure facilitate teachers in organizing their curriculum, their syllabus, their teaching learning activities, assignments and assessment strategies, as also for students to know that at what level they are learning. There are different interpretations of taxonomy of educational objectives which initiated with Benjamin Bloom, as you see on your screen. In 1956, Professor Bloom chaired a committee on taxonomy of educational objectives, and prior to 1956 there have been a lot of deliberations for about 3-4 years that to what extent we could organize teaching, learning and mental activities such that it would facilitate teachers and students to organize their teaching and learning in a manner that which is largely those days were based on the behavioristic theories of learning, that as you have seen in behaviorism, that learning which takes place within, which has to be learned from outside, and therefore there must be an expression of learning within in outside activities, which would be called as assessment. The assessment would basically take into account to what extent the learning has taken place. In other words, how the behavior had changed in the individual student after going through a piece of instruction. Benjamin Bloom and colleagues, they devised a strategy. They would call it a taxonomy of educational objectives. The taxonomy is divided into three categories: cognitive, affective and psychomotor. These three domains of learning, cognitive, affective and psychomotor, they put together constitute the holistic learning. Bloom and colleagues, they classified the forms of learning and levels of learning. Levels of learning at different levels of complexity and specification in terms of output we could assess in terms of evaluation and assessment or examination. And the forms of learning would be in different ways, that from knowledge, starting from the lowest level of knowledge to the highest level of evaluation as they devised. Anderson and Cratchwell, after almost 45 to 50 years, in 2001 modified the taxonomy of educational objectives of Benjamin Bloom and colleagues, and instead of creating nouns, they created verbs. As you will see on your screen, the holistic picture of Bloom's taxonomy, categories are affective, cognitive and psychomotor, and the taxonomy is into a holistic mental picture, and each category, cognitive, psychomotor and affective, they have been devised and they have been categorized into different categories that we will discuss subsequently in this program. And this provides a holistic picture that to what extent the mental structure and mental activities of individual students and teachers undergo in a teaching learning process. The hierarchy in learning objectives is the lower order thinking skill to higher order thinking skills, starting from knowledge, then comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis and evaluation. These you will see that in a hierarchical order could be devised by teachers in their curriculum and syllabus and teaching learning strategies and teaching learning resources, the process of teaching learning, and finally the assessment or the examination or the evaluation strategy. As you will see on your screen, very categorically, these five: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis and evaluation, to what extent a student will be able to demonstrate, will be able to do after going through a course of instruction. At the knowledge level, this is a simple recall, rote memorization or recognition of something which already existed, and therefore one could use that a student would be able to define or describe or identify or recall. When you go to the comprehensive level, it involves understanding of what the facts mean to the students. And therefore the students, to express their own understanding, would be able to distinguish between different principles, different facts, different ideas, different objects, different events and phenomena, explain or give examples or rewrite something. Beyond comprehension, because knowledge and comprehension are prerequisite to get into application, this is in a hierarchical order. We will see that how this gets really mixed up in an advanced form of or revised form of Bloom's taxonomy. The third stage is application, that the correct use of facts, rules and ideas that the students will be able to apply. They could compute, demonstrate, solve all kinds of application issues and problems could be expressed in terms of how the students will be able to apply in a particular context, particular discipline, particular topic, particular idea or fact or concept or principle, whatever the case may be. In any domain of learning, any discipline of learning, this could be applied. The fourth stage is analysis, that breaking down information into component parts. The students would be able to analyze, compare, illustrate. Given that something whole is given, that they will be able to bifurcate, distinguish, and create parts of the whole. So they would be able to analyze. The next stage is exactly opposite, which is synthesis, that given the facts, ideas, information separately, the students would be able to combine those into a whole. They will be able to conclude, criticize, justify, and so on and so forth. The final stage of learning, at the higher order learning, is evaluation. And evaluation is a judgment on forming an opinion about the information or a situation that the students will be able to compose, devise, modify, plan. So friends, this hierarchy of learning would together contribute to design of syllabus, design of teaching and learning resources, teaching learning process, use of media and technology, engaging students in activities, and final assessment strategy. So an assessment rubric would also eventually, at the end of the instruction, will build around the what learning objective was intended for in that particular course of instruction, and therefore the assessment would focus on testing or examining those learning objectives, whether they have been achieved by the students or not. This is a holistic picture, a graphic representation of Bloom's taxonomy, starting from knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. As you will read separately later on, the different boxes that are given there, which express or which explain that what the domain is all about. And these learning objectives, the taxonomy of Benjamin Bloom and colleagues, later on by Anderson and Cratchwell in 2001, as I noted earlier, was modified, and basically starting from the lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills, they retained, this is expressed in terms of verbs, number one. Number two, they have retained remembering, understanding, and applying and analyzing, but reshuffled synthesis and evaluation into evaluating and creating a new stage of learning, the highest order of learning, that is creativity, or creating something new out of one's own learning, preceding or succeeding after evaluation. So remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. As you will see, that the earlier original taxonomy was expressed in noun form, knowledge, comprehension, application, and so on and so forth. And the revised taxonomy was expressed in verbal form, that one, therefore, recognition in the process of doing things, remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, and evaluating combines both synthesis and evaluation. And synthesis, of course, becomes creating, which is the last stage of the revised taxonomy. Again, the Bloom's taxonomy, starting from remembering to creating, the explanations have been given in boxes that you will read, and the point that is to justify here is that the creativity at the last stage would happen occasionally, that the students must have completed remembrance, understanding, application, analysis, evaluation, and therefore they would be in a position to create. We will see later at the last point of this program that how this is also, even the revised Bloom's taxonomy has also been criticized from different points of view, that they have been inadequate to address some of the new learning theories like constructivism and connectivism are trying to address. The Bloom's taxonomy, especially the cognitive domain, is often applied by educationists and teachers and professors in any discipline that one could apply in engineering and technology, in medicine, in literature, in social science and management and education, and so on and so forth. And the four categories on your left side that you see, that the knowledge domains have been categorized into four categories, that the factual knowledge, the conceptual knowledge, the procedural knowledge, and metacognitive knowledge. And these have been listed here for remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. What we'll see in this PowerPoint is the last, that is the metacognitive knowledge. for the first time going beyond the traditional behavioristic philosophy or theory of learning and going beyond the original Bloom's taxonomy. What this is recognized, Anderson and Cratchwell for the first time recognized, and later on many colleagues on the basis of research, they recognized the metacognitive knowledge. Metacognition is basically that facilitating students to identify their own abilities and to put into effective practice, for fruitful practice, their own abilities. So students will be able to be aware of their own self-regulation and other abilities within, will be manipulating and using and handling those capabilities to the best understanding and knowledge and application that the students could have. And at the end of the day, the metacognitive knowledge would facilitate both the teachers and students and across students to manipulate their own abilities to create the best understanding and application that one could have, as also in a class, in a group situation, contribute to other students and peers' understanding. So the metacognitive knowledge has been brought in, which basically was recognized later in cognitive and constructivist theories of learning, and they have been modified in the revised Bloom's taxonomy to the extent that one could appropriate, one could execute, construct, achieve, and therefore take action and actualize. Actualize would be able to be in a situation that in one's own cognitive structure, one will be internalizing that. That will become part of the one's own personality and understanding. And therefore, in terms of next learning, one could recall what one has understood earlier and therefore relate to new situations. And in the process, would also manipulate one's own ability and more importantly, the self-regulating abilities that one will be able to handle, control, manipulate and put into appropriate use. What you see here is that what we have presented here is that how the taxonomy of educational objectives would correspond to the technology options that are available to us. So for instance, remembering, one can use bookmarks, flashcard and Googling to practice the objective of remembering. For understanding and comprehension, one can take online note, internet searching, tagging, annotating. These are all online activities or computerized activities that one can in digital learning. These would facilitate understanding. For application, one can do one's own blogging, a collaborative learning online, or uploading and sharing, editing text and audio or video or graphics or animation or a learning object that is available online that one could apply, and these would facilitate application part of learning. Even if one is teaching within the classroom, if not it's an exclusive online learning, even if it isn't within the classroom, these strategies could be used by professors and teachers such that they would facilitate application of students besides what they would do physically face to face within and outside the classroom. In case of analysis, one can do a fishbowling or running a test or do a mess up, joining together data into a whole, messing up or cracking that something is given already. One could crack the code and decipher and bifurcate and therefore would again join back. So analysis and synthesis put together, and evaluation would involve say online surveys, say SurveyMonkey, something like that, many other software that are available today free of cost, and they are open source software available. One could do a blogging, one can do an e-moderation, one can do an e-testing, e-portfolio and so on and so forth. And the final stage of creation that one would be able to network, model, do a programming, do a publishing, online publishing, or do a video blogging, for instance. This is a highest order of learning that one is into. And finally, the criticism of the Bloom's taxonomy that is available to us is generally Bloom's taxonomy has been helpful in facilitating many teachers, and almost all teachers who have been using Bloom's taxonomy or the revised form of Bloom's taxonomy in organizing their curriculum, in designing their syllabus in a modular way, in a credit-based modular way, systematically, maybe in linear, in a branching fashion, or in a holistic fashion. Also organizing their teaching and learning, finding out learning resources, including open educational resources today, organizing those in terms of taxonomy of educational objective that the students will be able to achieve at the end of the instruction. So the resources are organized accordingly, and the teaching learning process takes place accordingly. The media and technology could be used accordingly within the classroom or could be combined with the networked learning or internet or the web-based learning, starting from audiovisual aids to web-based learning. And finally, the assessment rubric or the assessment strategies would be based on the learning objectives. I must conclude by simply saying that the Bloom's taxonomy has been extremely helpful, even if it is largely based on the behavioristic theory of learning, but it is largely helpful for organizing teaching and learning and curriculum strategies and activities, teaching learning, both curricular, co-curricular and extracurricular teaching learning activities within and outside the classroom. But there have been limitations of the Bloom's taxonomy, including the revised Bloom's taxonomy, which has included metacognitive skills as the fourth process of learning in teaching learning process in individual students and groups of students. Even in professional development programs, the Bloom's taxonomy has been extremely useful. I have listed down here 4 general criticisms that are applicable to the Bloom's taxonomy, and therefore the new learning theories have taken care of these limitations and try to address those. One, that hierarchy is not always linear, that learning doesn't take place in a linear fashion. Sometimes one could apply, and therefore if you see that the third point, the problem-based learning, that one could simply start applying the knowledge and then try to decipher and comprehend parts and try to understand the principles, laws, rules, regulations and principles that are involved in that concept on the process or the event or the phenomenon, and would be able to learn. So meaning thereby that learning is not always linear, that one could jump frog from one to the other, and sometimes one can do a backward chaining, that starting from an application one would try to understand and therefore try to remember and later on try to synthesize and then therefore internalize. Number 2, the scaffolding or the facilitating students, hand-holding students is needed in teaching learning for higher order learning. For instance, in constructivism, it is assumed that it is believed that each student has got the ability to learn, and each student is unique and distinct from the other students. Even twins are not the same, and therefore the teacher's responsibility is to develop the metacognitive skills in students, that the students will be able to identify their own abilities of learning and would try to manipulate and apply to situations to learn their best. And therefore the constructive philosophy tries to address this scaffolding, and therefore handholding and scaffolding by the teacher would be individual student based. Instead of doing a group-based teaching and learning, that the teacher would be in a position to understand in constructivist classroom, would be able to understand to what extent each individual student is different from the other, and therefore would facilitate, do hand-holding and bring out the awareness in students of their own abilities, which are unique to themselves. Each individual student has unique abilities of learning, and therefore facilitate that and try to connect that with the teaching learning situation which is common to all. So therefore scaffolding is very important, and scaffolding has not been very easy in terms of individualized student learning insofar as Bloom's taxonomy is concerned. So therefore behaviorism has not been able to address this as much as constructivism and later on connectivism have been able to address. The third point I have already described, that the problem-based learning, first the problem, apply and then to learn. This is a new process of learning rather than knowing, comprehending and then applying and then going to analysis and synthesis and evaluation, or for that matter creation in the revised Bloom's taxonomy. So therefore reverse order of learning, or learning from at any stage, any order of learning, starting from application, coming back to comprehension, therefore understanding and therefore internalizing that knowledge could be possible. And Bloom's taxonomy, being hierarchical, doesn't recognize and doesn't appreciate this. And therefore the problem-based learning basically, which is a new development, discovery learning and problem-based learning, and for critical thinking these days would reverse the Bloom's taxonomy. In other words, would apply Bloom's taxonomy in a topsy-turvy, in an eclectic way which would suit the individual students and the teachers and the topic and the process of teaching learning at that point of time, because learning is more contextualized, and therefore contextualization would facilitate reversing Bloom's taxonomy the way it would be applicable to at that point of time insofar learning achievement of learning objectives are concerned. Now, finally, constructivism and connectivism, they have come out with some of the very interesting ideas, processes and interpretations based on research which Bloom's taxonomy doesn't address. So, for instance, learning is more holistic, learning is more connected. The connectivism that we will see in another program, that how connectivism believes that the artifacts, the nodes which contain information, they need to be successfully connected and used to practice at that point of learning, at the real time that one must be able to connect. So, the best, most effectively one is able to connect knowledge through various networks, through various artifacts within the networks, through various nodes within the networks which contain information, which contain application of knowledge. If properly connected, one learns better. So, holistic connectivity in learning, interrelated learning and individualized learning, that learning is more individualized, that there are distinctions between even twins. So, constructivism and connectivism have been able to address this holistic learning, which behaviorism and therefore Bloom's taxonomy has not been able to address this issue. So, therefore, friends, given these critical appreciation of Bloom's taxonomy, I must conclude by simply saying that Bloom's taxonomy has been very helpful in not only writing learning objectives, that what the students will be able to achieve at the end of a piece of teaching learning process, but also in reality to organize learning resources, to organize teaching learning processes, to bring in media and technology to meet the learning objectives based on Bloom's taxonomy of knowledge, understanding, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, or the revised taxonomy, which talks about metacognition and creativity, or creating at the end of highest order of learning. Whatever the case may be, that Bloom's taxonomy has been helpful in facilitating teaching learning. Even today, in web-based learning, the behaviorism and Bloom's taxonomy are equally helpful as much as constructivism and connectivism are. I do hope that you will be able to appreciate what has been presented very briefly in this program, would read more based on these presentations on Bloom's taxonomy and the revised taxonomy, and how these could be applicable to net-based learning, online learning or e-learning, or technology-enabled education. And various software, various possibilities, network possibilities, online possibilities are there which could facilitate, including blogging and wikis. The blogging is about individualized reflection and wikis are about collective reflection. Both can be brought in vis-a-vis constructivist and connectivist theories of learning and combined with behavioristic theories of learning to achieve the best results, and therefore this could be eclectic. So therefore it is, I do believe that they are an eclectic combination, judicious, scientific, objective combination based on the context of learning would best achieve the learning objectives and therefore learning outcomes in students, and therefore effectiveness of teaching and learning than simply following one theory of learning. Thank you very much indeed.